Greetings and welcome everybody. This is the second episode of the Middle Grades Collaborative Conversations for the 2020-2021 school year. Obviously, this year is a little bit different, dealing with the pandemic. We're still focused on issues of personalization, personalized learning, and in particular equity, but there's all sorts of other strands that are coming to play as we're teaching through this disruption. Before we get going, I'd like to thank the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education for supporting this work. I'd also like to thank our contributors who've been regular and positive influences on this webinar, and we'll have them introduce themselves in just a second. This afternoon, we're going to continue to discuss the transformation of our educational communities due to the pandemic. We'll talk about building relationships and how personalized learning has become more critical. And then we'll talk also maybe a little bit about teacher self-care and some of the strategies that folks are using with their students to maintain healthy learning environments. And I think one thing that Lindsey and Sarah talked about last month was, what are some of the unique opportunities that are coming out of the disruption or that the remote learning environment provides for all of us? So again, welcome. I'm going to create just a speaking order real quick so that we can get that out of the way, and then I'll have folks introduce themselves, and then we'll get going. So we're going to have Maura introduce herself first, and then Lindsey, and then Kevin, Meg, Sarah, and then Sam. All right. So again, welcome everybody. If you just want to give a brief introduction and how things are going, and we'll take it from there. Maura.
Hi, I'm Maura Wieler. I'm the Proficiency-Based Learning and Technology Integration Coach at Lamoille South. I spent my summer very busy working on reopening of school. Currently on maternity leave, but keeping tabs on schools, and so excited to be here today.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, Lindsey Halman, Executive Director for Up for Learning, and happy to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Kevin Pioli-Hunt. I'm a 5A journalist on Swift House at Williston Central School.
Hi there, Meg O'Donnell. I teach humanities to 7th and 8th graders at Shelburne Community School.
Hi, I'm Sarah Popowicz, and I am a program director at Up for Learning.
Hey, I'm Sam Nelson. I normally teach middle school humanities at Shelburne Community School. This year, I'm teaching for our district's virtual learning academy, which is fully remote.
And again, my name is Don Taylor, and I teach language arts and social studies or humanities at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier. And yeah, things are going. We just finished our first month of face-to-face learning. Many of us have different sort of programs, and we've been in school face-to-face 5 days a week, a slightly modified schedule. And so on Friday, we finished our first month. And I just also want to talk about currently what happened this week is that we had 2 cases of COVID in our district. And so responding to that and also reflecting on our first month of in-person learning has been something that I've spent some time thinking about. But before we get to that, I would just like to have our initial question is sort of what's working for folks in regards to students and families, and how do teachers continue or educators continue to deal with some of the structures, restrictions, or protocols of pandemic teaching? So essentially, how are things going for you in the pandemic? We're about a month into the new school year, and maybe just give us a little summary of how things are going. And Maura, we'll start again with you.
So one of the things with teachers specifically that we spend a lot of time working on and continue to do is creating spaces for teachers sort of across schools and within schools to connect and share and give feedback about how things are going. So as we think about changes that need to be made or, what supports teachers need. And that was been really instrumental. And I think part of having to think about how we communicate and collaborate in new and different ways. It's allowed us to really think about how to connect teachers who might not work in the same building, and really use that voice to shape next steps, because teachers really are so close to students. And also we really need to think about how we're responding and supporting teacher needs. And so the teacher voice needs to be really central to some of those pieces. So that's one of the things that we've really been focused on sort of currently as we start to think about adding more days or things like that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So, being removed from the day-to-day, I don't have like the best like perspective, but what I do have is kind of a broader perspective from what we hear from lots of schools across the state, and it really varies. I think what we've seen at Up for Learning in the work that we're doing to facilitate change is that there were schools that were really needed some time just to try to figure out the how this is going to work for them, as far as like just the actual like reopening of schools and what it feels like, and take that time to like all the anxiety that occurred probably in August and throughout the summer, to feel like, okay, like we've got this thing right now, and it's constantly changing and evolving. So we're finding that we're hearing mixed things from lots of schools, but in general, it feels like everyone feels really just grateful to be back in community with their learners and with their colleagues, and no matter what that looks like, hybrid or full-time, whatever that is. And then, I mean, we also hear things like, I've been in a number of meetings where guidance counselors have shared that they have great concerns because they haven't seen their students in person and or on the virtual platform. So I think there's a lot, and I think families are also evolving and working their way through this with the changes. I know as a parent, we get a different kind of like things have really been changing, especially as we moved into a different phase, and my daughter's going to be going back full time. So it's just like we're kind of all like taking it one step at a time, and that seems to be the way in which most schools are going about it too. But that kind of initial like the initial stress has kind of it feels like people have taken a breath, and it's like, okay, we're back together, we're doing our thing, and we're ready for what's next, and so that's what we've observed.
All right, thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, so overall, it's been tough, just like with everybody else. I think the biggest thing that I'm feeling, taking a step back, I guess I didn't realize like how much we do with kids that involves them really close together and sharing materials. And I was like, so much of our traditions on Swift House and the ways that we engage kids like require them to be working really closely together and all this project-based learning stuff. So it's been a really tough transition that way. And for me, it's been like the first time, and well, not the first time, but it's like since I really started teaching, I'm like, wow, this is really tough, and I don't feel like I'm very good at my job right now. So it's like it's been hard making the adjustment for sure. And the prep and planning looks different, and being split 2 and 2. I just miss seeing my teammates and missing the other half of my students. It's we're a family here, and it's really hard when you rip half of that away. You don't have that. But on the positive side of things, and Sam, I really appreciate the blog that you wrote, because I feel like you just got it. You've got everything in that one blog. It was great. Love it. So, positive side of things, it's making us all think really creatively about what we're doing, how we're adjusting, our content, how we're meeting different students' needs and families' needs, which I think is just great for the system of education as a whole. I think it's putting a magnifying glass on what we're doing for feedback and the feedback loop. Now, that's one thing I've been struggling with this year that I really want to focus more on is, how am I getting meaningful feedback to students when I'm not just seeing them face to face all the time, because I relied so much on that in person. And what's been nice too, and I'm thinking back to like, every week we have these weekly kid talk meetings about our kiddos who are really, needing some extra support, or maybe the system's not working for them right now, and making adjustments for them. So like, right, we're finally at a point where we can start letting, certain kids come 4 days a week that just, the remote thing wasn't happening for them and for whatever reason. And I'm just, again, really glad that we're taking the time and really thinking creatively about how we can support families and kids. So that piece of it's been great. But yeah, it's a grind. And like, Don, to your point, now that we've had the COVID case here in our building, it just, again, we had to go back to every time there's a transition, we have to make sure we know exactly who is 6 feet apart from each other. And it was, for a while it got a little lax because we have our kids moving from classes to classes. And like when they're outside eating lunch, we have to do a much better job at like writing down specifically where they're sitting, how long they're sitting there. And, you start laying that on top of the other things that are going on day to day, it can just become really overwhelming really quickly. So, that brought to light some stuff that we had to remind ourselves on in terms of our new normal right now. So we're getting by, and I definitely appreciate seeing you all and these conversations. That helps.
Thanks, Kev. Meg?
Yeah. Let me see if I can add to the discussion. Sure, I kind of echo everything that you've all shared already. I think something that I struggle with the most is that lack of colleagueship with my teammates, and that we have no common planning time. We have no time to see each other collectively to make intentional moves about what's happening for the team, conferences or and just systems, right? It's just so many systems. How's our attendance system? How are we managing? We're still trying to do some data collection with Star 360 and Close Gap and finding out how our kids are really doing. So I'm missing them tremendously. We're getting up at 6:30 in the morning to try to have common planning time, and that seems a little absurd. And I am feeling for schools that have had to face the having these positive cases, and that was a huge wake-up call, because I do think too that our systems were kind of slacking. Like, sure, you can have 2 or 3 of you could go meet out in the commons, and now it's like, nope, you can't anymore. And so how do we and the constant struggle of Monday, it feels like we're a Monday and then a Friday, and then it's a Monday and a Friday, and it's like we can't, like, just getting any sense of traction feels a little tricky. I think what is good is just the sharing of resources and of sharing of strategies that are working with kids, and just I feel like I'm spending hours planning lessons that it's taking me 2 hours to plan something that's going to last 20 minutes, and it's like, well, this is not effective. But the more familiar I get with tools and different technologies that allow me to allow kids to collaborate when we're in remote is good. And today we just tried to do a little electoral college debate and have kids stand on different sides of the room, and just everything is so intentional. You can't make a move without being like, okay, is this going to lead me closer to where we want to go? And I have a 3-week window, and I got to bang it out, and I got to make sure that they're on point. And I just when I think I'm too tired and I can't do it, I'm with the kids, and they just recharge me and refuel me, and I feel better, and I see them, and then I'm with, even if I'm not with all my colleagues, I'm with some, and I appreciate their friendship and support.
Awesome. Thanks, Meg. Sarah?
Yeah, I can echo a lot of what's been said. Like Lindsey, we're seeing a different perspective of lots of different schools, variations of where people are at. And I think one of the biggest things I've noticed is, depending on the school or the district or the supports, teachers are in very different places. Some of the schools we're working with are like, they're on it. They feel like they kind of worked all that stuff out in August, and have felt really supported and just, able to try to collaborate a little bit more together. And they're ready to dig into more of the deeper dives and the creativity and sort of like really ready to shake things up a little bit. And then other schools are literally still at, we don't know our schedule. Our principal can't answer these questions. Like I can't think about this kind of project or long-term or, you know, youth adult partnerships. They're like, they're not there yet because those basic needs are still not being met for not only the faculty, but clearly for the students as well. So the positive side is we do see a lot of schools and teachers just, you know, really getting into the swing of it now, having really great creative ideas. I'm excited to share those ideas, feeling better about technology and strategies and like really willing to share those out, which is awesome. And I've also noticed, maybe just from my own children, one's a 7th grader and one's a 9th grader, that the curriculum has been pared down. They just don't have as many classes a day, which I'm sure is pretty common because class sizes had to be smaller. But so the amount that they're able to sort of like that depth that they're able to get into with just a few teachers and really sort of sink in, I think right now was a good strategy, and I'm seeing some positives from that.
Awesome, thank you. Sam?
Yeah. Well, again, the reminder that I've got a really unique situation this year. And so before I gush a little bit about how it allows me to not toil with a lot of the same problems y'all are describing, like everything about being in a fully remote school means it's under an umbrella of a system that's not truly equitable for families, especially like the younger those students get, the more unrealistic it is for parents to be able to say like, sure, like we can provide full-time coverage while you're being a remote learner. So that's the reality. Living in that reality, oh my gosh, like under that umbrella, the things that are coming with being fully remote are like, oh gosh, I wrote them down. So there's obviously safety, but like with that, there's consistency. And there's a clear future. I mean, like we are not dealing with the stressors that all of you are, which is a huge challenge for anyone, like the families, the teachers, the students in public schools right now. And so not having to deal with that has enabled us to, of course, like move forward with making the best we can of remote learning. That's what I was talking about in that blog post that Kevin mentioned. And yeah, there's a lot of good, there's still a lot of bad, a lot of the stressors that people have mentioned, whether it's full, you know, in-person, hybrid, or remote. I think we're all kind of feeling that. But probably the biggest thing that came to mind when you mentioned like what are the structures that we have in place that are working, Don, is like, I just think about how effective it's been to really pare down the amount of instruction there is, build in the amount of work time, and especially what's been incredibly effective is a bigger model for like open callback. So teachers are available with open Zooms, and students can use their needs-based approach to connect with the teachers, or the other way around, teachers can kind of call in those specific students to check in. And to have that like really structured into what we do as teachers is making everything better. And it's moving away from that old model of literally herding around groups of students for 7 straight hours and then expecting them to go home and do more work. So it's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you very much. And our next topic, I'd like to talk about equity just in a little bit more detail. I'd also like to welcome Joe Rivers from Brattleboro. Joe, it's good to see you. I noticed something's missing. I can't tell what it is. I think it might be a mustache, but that's a new look for Joe. I'd like to, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge sort of what people are feeling and how people are feeling it. And I think that, I mean, it's not easy, right? And people are going through their own experiences. And I don't know, I mean, to hear you folks talk about it just makes me think more deeply about what's happening with our kids and families. And I just really appreciate that. And one of the things that I like to connect. And so Meg read this poem from Facing History last month called Brave Spaces. And we ended up taking that and making that into an identity project where we talked about brave spaces. And then we asked kids to think about their identity through their home space or where they get their caregivers. And they wrote about that a little bit, and they did an illustration, and we kind of integrated that with some mapping. And then we had them do like a Dennis the Menace map, you know, of school, like where they go in the school and where they spend their time, because it's so much more different because they're in a pod structure. And they wrote about that as well. And then we asked them to talk about their community spaces that have maybe changed. So in Montpelier, they have a really beautiful rec field with a public pool, and the Mountaineers baseball team plays. It's kind of an idyllic setting for a summer day. And we had them write about how that's changed and how they felt about that. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we've been asking kids to reflect on their experience a lot. And today I was asking kids, well, what's it like to be back in class, to be in school? And how does this compare to the remote learning? And it was really interesting to hear their feedback. And Joe Rivers has said many times, start with the students. So I'm putting an extra emphasis on having kids reflect. And we had gone away from blogging for a while, but this year we're blogging again and just having kids write about their experience. And what was really amazing was how many kids talked about the anxiety of missing school last spring and feeling like they're behind, or they might have missed some crucial element of their education. And hearing kids voice that, I think really put some humanity behind what people are dealing with. And as I had mentioned before, last night we got the call that there had been some positive cases in our school district. And so one of the things that I wrote down was, what's your communication plan with families? Because this morning I got in there and I'm like, okay, guys, remember, this is our communication plan. And I had a video that's out on our YouTube channel explaining to parents, this is exactly what it's going to look like if we have to go remote tomorrow. And then the other piece of that, in a few weeks, we're supposed to start reading a book. We read it aloud. Everybody has a copy of the book. Should I hand that out tomorrow? Because if something happens, how are we going to do that? And so what are the structures that we're using to plan? So kids are going to be absent for much longer periods of time throughout this whole winter. Because if a kid is sick, they're going to have to go to the doctor. They're going to have to get tested. So teachers need to be preparing, like, how am I structuring my class so that if you have a kid who's missing 5 or 6 days because they're in quarantine, that you can be feeding them the learning and keeping them engaged, right? So that's something I'm definitely thinking about. And then the other piece that Sarah mentioned was this idea of creativity. I was reading somewhere where a teacher's most successful unit was really based around creativity and the arts. And we did a hands-on project last week, and kids are just loving that. They're loving being off the computer, cutting and pasting. We did Romare Bearden collages. And I just feel like kids are really into the hands-on project-based learning now. They're in a community, but they're not on the computer, right? And so I just feel like that's something that kids are really yearning for, and they express that. And then just the last thing is, I've compared sort of what we're doing to an expedition, and I talk a lot about expedition behavior. Like, we have a 10-month expedition, and what are the behaviors that we need to exhibit in order to succeed? And what's going to happen when we have down days? And what's going to happen when we have challenges? And how are we going to get everybody on board and moving in the right direction? I was referencing like Shackleton, like, the endurance, what are we going to do? But thinking about it as an expedition and really caring for everybody and making sure kids realize that we need to be empathetic and kind, and that we just need to be mindful of how other kids are feeling and the issues that we're all going through. So those are just some of my takeaways from the first month. And, it's really interesting to hear other people's perspective, as always. But one thing that Sam brought up was this idea of equity. And are all kids, getting the learning? Are all kids getting the support they need? And then in particular, I know that Lindsey has always been a big proponent of, that triangle of students to teachers, families. And how are we equitably engaging families and keeping them apprised of their situation? So I would just maybe like to hear how folks are thinking about equity. We do have a document that we've been using, which is from Jeannie Phillips at the Tarrant Institute. It's called a Middle School Competency Equity Crosswalk. And just maybe if folks want to talk about their equity concerns in their current situation, that would be appreciated. And Maura?
Thanks so much. I think folks have sort of touched on some of these pieces, but as Sam was saying, the access or the decisions about being fully remote versus being in person, there's some really big gaps and inequities there about which families sort of benefit the most or have the opportunity to make decisions. And I also think about the stresses on families of having it be 2 days a week, or, you know, it's the Monday, Thursday, and decisions that that families need to make. And I think it's really, it's widening some of those gaps. I think it is working for some folks, but there are definitely people who don't have access to making some of those decisions. I also think, you know, there are also opportunities in some of these pieces. So we've talked about paring down curriculum or rethinking how we teach things. It's kind of provided this opportunity. We have to rethink what we're doing. We have to rethink who's represented in our curriculum. We have these opportunities to do things differently because we really can't do them in the same ways. And so, so I think that's something that, you know, we've really been talking about, you know, as we're making these decisions. Okay, let's then go a little one step deeper and let's really think about the curriculum that we are providing based on this sort of pared down opportunity, and then also having longer chunks of time with students, really getting to know them, providing opportunities for them to do some identity pieces in the classroom and really meeting them where they are. I think is something that's been another one of those silver linings. But I think with every opportunity, there's also that blind spot or that drawback, or, you know, I think decisions are made quickly and trying to be responsive, and it just keeps sort of like widening that gap in those inequities. And so it's thinking about what are the questions that we need to be considering and asking sort of at every step, and who's at the table to help you make those decisions, which I think is a really huge one, especially as schools are trying to be agile and have flexibility and speed in some of the decisions that they're making. You know, really then not taking the time to think about, okay, who is at the table making those decisions and giving that feedback.
Thank you, Maura. Lindsey?
Yeah, I think a couple points that I could echo from Maura is, well, one, in talking with a number of our youth partners, just about their experiences thus far, that the idea that like now when I'm actually like at school, like I'm actually like doing, like I'm actually engaged in like authentic learning, and it's not like and this is what they've shared with me is like it's not like filler, you know. So like we're really digging in because like there's this like need to dig in. And I know, like Meg, you were saying, like one day feels like Monday and the next day feels like Friday, and you know, it's like not that we're trying to cram it in, because that's the opposite, but I think what I'm noticing is the creativity of educators and thinking about how do we use this time and space in a way that is more deeply impactful and meaningful for all learners. So that's one piece. But then like the other piece around equity is, you know, I mean, the school system is so inequitable to begin with, you know, like, so like if you didn't realize that before the pandemic, then, you know, we've just now caused way more harm and left further behind so many young people, those that are underserved and marginalized in our communities. And if we try to then now, you know, hope that we're gonna like eventually go back to what that was once like we are out of this pandemic, then that's really unfortunate. I really hope that's not the case. But I think this is just, again, I think we talked about this last month. I mean, I think we talk about it every day. It's just like the spotlight is now really bright on how inequitable the system is and where all the cracks are. And then how can we penetrate those cracks with some new opportunities, you know? And like, Maura, I heard you say, like, who's at the table and how are they, you know, how are they showing up? Who's not at the table? And I'm just thinking about a couple of examples, because we work with a lot of different schools across the state. I think I shared this last time, but it was just launching. We've been working with Missisquoi Valley Middle School and High School and Swanton, and they really wanted to use the opportunity for Youth Adult Partnership to create the MV Unity Response Team, which is collecting ongoing feedback from their peers and from the school staff and families around, like, how is this going for you? What questions do you have? What needs do you have? And this group is meeting weekly on Google Meets. We meet weekly. And they are, collecting the information from all the different stakeholders to make some sense of it. And hopefully be really clear about what actions need to happen. And so instead of just like hearing some voices at the table, they're trying to bring as many voices to the table as possible by collecting information from their peers, peer to peer, and then the teachers and families. And so using this opportunity to start thinking about how can we transform our schools in this time of COVID has been really an interesting piece for us to experience, particularly around a project that's all about responding to COVID. It's like, so out of this, when we're out of COVID and out of the pandemic someday, they have, started to really penetrate those cracks with some light and started to dismantle parts of their system where youth and adults are now working in a different way together. And that collecting the voices, that participatory piece of participatory action research, getting the voices of the whole community is at the center of their work from here moving forward. So that's just one example. And then my other example is just thinking about, we're helping to facilitate partnership in the Winooski School District and a couple of different projects. But one, I've been working with the a youth partner and I from Winooski we had our second board meeting last night. We're working with the school board, the Winooski Students for Anti-Racism, the leadership team in Winooski, and families, the community, and the city on addressing some of the harm that occurred and moving into healing space around this summer when the Winooski Students for Anti-Racism brought forth the demands to the school board, and the demands were mostly accepted, and but everything happened really quickly and in response in like in a reactive way, and so there was a lot of harm along the way. And so Meg, I just want to put a shout out to you. I've used Brave Spaces now in like 17,000 different like ways to build community, and so thank you for sharing that last time. Like I was just like, woo, and then I was like, that's the poem that will start every circle. But one thing that we've talked like in this retreat, thinking about the Winooski Students for Anti-Racism and their the demands moving forward, is that it has to be everyone's voices have to be involved in this. That like we leave people behind when we act with urgency. So like urgency is important. Like there's this idea like around advocacy and activism right now to like there's things that must change. And how do we ensure that we are creating the time and space for everyone to be clear about what the changes are and why they're happening? And the last thing I have a lot of thoughts, but the last thing I would just say about that is the question around who's at the table and who's not, and like what is like when we ask people to show up for things, who are we asking it? Like it's going to be the same people showing up, so why are we not creating the space and time during the school day to do this important work, for students? So anyways, I'll put a period there and pass it on.
Thank you, Lindsey. I appreciate those remarks. And I think I just like that idea of the purpose and vision. And one thing that you said, leaving people behind when we act urgently. I think that schools have been acting urgently. And I fear that, in fact, we probably are leaving kids behind. And how do we rectify that or address that? Thank you. Kevin?
This just makes me think again. I mean, it's a common thread here, but in terms of access and who has access, we keep running into, we have our split model with 2 and 2. So we lose so much on those remote days. For what's been great is that most of our kids will tune in for our advisory and then not for the classes. So it again just shows how important those relationships are in the SEL work that we're doing, but all of a sudden, like, we're what, however many weeks in, we've had like 8-10 in-person days, which is like mind-boggling that that's the only amount we've had because it's 2 days a week. So we're just missing, these kids are missing so much of these connections. And then, on top of that, when we're looking at, for Swift House at least, a lot of the work that we do to get kids involved with like 4-H programs and like cultivating pathways, it's all during the school day and through our sustainability programs that we couldn't really get up and running this year just because of the nature of us trying to figure everything out. And, some kids are still getting involved because they're able to and they have access and resources at home, but those are the kids doing it. Like those other, there's so many kids that don't have access to these materials or just aren't even able to, have the time at home because they're taking care of their brothers and sisters. Like they don't get to even look at these programs. And this is just, magnified that issue even more so this year. And just why, going back to a lot of points, again, when we go back to in person, I really hope that we start considering like what kind of things are we doing with our students during the school day, and not just, are we just jamming content down their throat? Are we giving them time to explore some of these amazing programs out there while we have them, while they have access to materials in the building? Because right now, more than ever, I'm just like, wow, like the kids that we had awesome opportunities last year with some of our, programs that we were doing with their sustainability. Since we can't do that in person, or we could do that in person, we haven't gotten our heads wrapped around it yet. That's out the window, because right now it's like a case of haves and have-nots. Like who's able to get this and has the resources and time to access these, and who doesn't. And it's not a good feeling to every time we push something out to just know the handful of kids who are going to be able to access them and the ones that are not going to be able to. And then, just in terms of that question about, how are we within our curriculum talking about equity and the social issues and anti-racism? We started the school year with this, grand idea of having, starting with anti-racist lit books and really getting into it. We were going to meet virtually once a week on Wednesdays. But then again, those kids who tuned in virtually are the ones who have access to those conversations. And we're missing so many kids at the table there who we want to hear their voices. And it's hard to have those conversations in person, when you're not really feeling the room. So many of those things, we need those interpersonal connections with our kids. And it's, they're important, obviously, to have regardless of the capacity. But, it's one of those things where like, yeah, we really want to have these talks in person with our kids. And Don, I know you've always been such a proponent. One thing that has gone pretty well, we surveyed our kids earlier. I know you're always saying get feedback, survey them. And a few weeks back, we surveyed our kids about what was going well and what wasn't in terms of our setup and our schedule, and got amazing feedback from them in terms of the structure. And we changed it just this week, and already like we've gotten some really positive feedback from our kids just about how much better like the days have gone in terms of their stress and management of our schedule based on it's a little tweak in our schedule that's really changed the game for them. So I would just keep putting a plug in for that too throughout this process. And Don, I know you always preach this, and it's great. It's finally sinking in. Like, get feedback from your kids as much as possible, and be willing to make the changes for them, because especially now we're all kind of building the plane as it's flying right now, and doing the best that we can.
Thanks very much, Kev. Meg?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kev. I think something I'm mindful of when I think about our kids is the human resources that are needed to support these kids, and how tapped our human resource people are, because some of them are in both in remote, in the Virtual Learning Academy, and in supporting in person. And so I worry about this, the system being able to support these kids, and how do we help create a modified program when we're so, mono-focused on like what's happening tomorrow. Like, what do I need to do to get ready for tomorrow? And how am I making sure that the kids are there? Kev, I feel you on that. We have Wednesdays fully remote and have kids from 8:30 to 11, and have dubbed the day Impactful Wednesdays. And have asked the kids through surveys to try to say, okay, how can we make this day feel, what are the opportunities that we might have that we wouldn't have in our class structure or in our in-person days. And we you know, we pushed out the global read aloud for this year is stamped, and we you know, put out a survey who might be interested, and we got some kids that were interested. But then we just said, you know what, let's just read the first 2 chapters while we're all together, and then got so many more kids like fired up. They're like, hey, can we do this every week? Can we have a read aloud? And, you know, please don't make us do like literature circle activities. Can we just be read to? Can we just think about these ideas that come from this powerful book? And it was just a reminder that, you know, sometimes we just need to bring as much as we can to them and expose them to as much as we can and take advantage of, okay, you're right there in front of me. I'm going to read you this book. And then let's talk about it. And that's been great. And we are fortunate in our district that we've bought into this Close Gap program, which is like an online sort of check-in, social emotional check-in. And that's been really helpful to just kind of see who's struggling. You know, the kids are testing the system a little bit, but they do it twice a week, and we get a little window on how they're doing. And that and the weekly emails, the family emails is really my lifeline to families. So I can at least, you know, it takes a little time, and I got behind, and that can be stressful, but just that's my one ticket in, like once a week, to just be like, hey, this is what I'm seeing, how are you doing? And an opportunity to sort of see where they're at. And I guess my last thing is just, I'm finding myself more and more in that intentionality that everything, you know, I put in front of kids has to have something about marginalized groups, whether it's we're doing current events, what's out there in the news. Monday was Indigenous Peoples Day, and we focused the whole day on that and trying to get a land acknowledgement. Like, I just feel like again, if I got this short window, I'm gonna pack in as much as I can. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Meg. Sarah?
Yeah. Yeah, just in thinking around equity, my mind keeps, as everyone's talking, my mind keeps going to trying to get at the heart of helping youth have voice for change that they need right now. So what is not working? Who does not have a voice? Why don't they have a voice? Or why don't they feel like they have a voice? Have they never been asked? Who should be doing the asking? How do we let them know and help support and bring that to the table? Because that big picture idea of getting at how are we going to make sure that everyone is safe and okay and available to learn, and I have no idea what home life looks like for most of these, you know, students. I mean, I did more when I was working like in a school, in a classroom. I had a stronger connection. Now I don't, because I don't know all these families in my community. They're not in my community anymore, and it just amplifies that idea that this is the time when schools really need to be working with, like, asking those questions, collecting data, and then using it. And I was working with a YATS team last night, actually, and it was so interesting to watch their thought process about how to, you know, what's the best way to use their voice. And they really hated, like, they're being forced to use Canvas, and they hate it. And they're like, they don't understand, they, as in like teachers and admin, it doesn't work for us, and this is a problem, and, you know, if only we could switch this. And the whole conversation ended in, can they get a seat at the school board table? Right? Because these are the nitty gritty that people need to understand. And maybe there's things they can change and maybe there's not, but they belong in the conversation. And I just thought that was super powerful and spot on. And so I don't know, I get that everyone is overwhelmed and a little bit fried, and it just seems hard sometimes to know what the best way to reach out and make all those connections happen. But even today, I have been trying to reach this one student for almost 2 weeks now, and I haven't heard from him, and I'm worried, and I don't know why he's not responding. And it's like that gut feeling of, you know, I know that there's something we can probably do, but I don't know what else to do. And obviously we're all in that boat and feeling that situation. So anyway, I know that that's rambling. Oh, the other weird thing, not weird, but just like equity wise, supports around, like, because everything is on Zoom and everything is overloaded, like the email piece, if students have never actually been taught how to look at your daily emails and sort those out, that's like a thing that has to happen. And so I'm thinking of everyone who's like got 25 Google Classrooms, and every single time one little thing gets changed on a Google Classroom, they get an email. So every morning, these poor students are opening up their computers to, no joke, 102 emails, and then they don't answer the one. And then they're like, you're not focused, you're not trying, you're not, you know, you got to be on top of it. It just, I feel like I think that gap has just been missed with the electronic equity, I guess. And some students can really hone in on that and know how to do that. And for others, it's just an expectation, and that has never been addressed. And so that in itself, just not clicking on an email, can disrupt the whole day, the whole week, a whole unit, a whole like relationship. And I don't think I definitely know, at least in the district I'm seeing, is not being addressed. And just one more thing. Yeah. Anyway, a little bit of a ramble, but same thing. I could go on and on.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Appreciate that. Sam?
Yeah. I took diligent notes so as not to just ramble, because I'm with you, Sarah. And in terms of electronic equity, yeah, I mean, same deal, especially we're finding that, like, since we're 5th through 8th grade, those 5th graders are not only not trained to like know how to use email daily, but most of them have never used Google Classroom before. So, you know, the onus is on us to do the teaching, like the direct instruction. And I've never made so many screencasts in my life, so that then you can also push out those simple instructions. So if those students miss when you're doing it directly, they've got that that screencast there too. Same with recording my instructions, so I can just push it out and ensure that at least every kid can get to it. But yeah, holy cow, connections. Mego, appreciate it. Love the shout out. We're doing the same with Stamped. Like the global read aloud is amazing, but like it goes at its own pace. I like that we're doing the same. We're going to kind of take at our own rate, read and discuss as a class. And then, yeah, I'm glad you gave a shout out to Close Gap, because you're right. Like when we're not in the same physical space as kids, there's that teacher sixth sense. Like we get to know when something might be off with a kid. You don't really get that through a screen. So Close Gap is a tool to try to kind of break down those walls, get a little light through those cracks, as Lindsay was saying. And, you know, kids are testing it, like you said, and they're testing it in lots of ways to putting it that way. But that's a helpful tool. Other stuff I've seen that has been helpful, like I got to give a shout out to the people, even though we're a fully remote academy, there are people in our faculty that are doing the home visits. I'm thinking about Tim, our digital learning leader. I'm thinking about Rachel, our counselor, who is doing home visits to ensure that people have the access, the connectivity, and are like inviting them in. Like we've got people physically moving into our community, and holy cow, how do you start doing that and then start remotely? It's nice to have that person-to-person interface. In terms of like, one thing that I think we're doing well, I mentioned it earlier, the looseness of our schedule and having this structured in kind of open callback time, open office hours, whatever you want to call it, that's hugely helpful, especially for providing services to students. Instead of like the old pull-out model, which can be really overt, this gives a chance for like, I mean, we've got staff on hand that are SLPs, special educators, para-educators, and classroom teachers. Like we can connect with the students in a time that doesn't feel like it's being, you know, shoehorned into the schedule. It's kind of there already. So it's not hard for us to try to coordinate those services. And then the last thing I want to mention is just, as always, like when you want students to feel like curriculum represents who they are, which is a big part of equity from a student perspective, you got to give them ownership. And so some of the things that have gone well this year are, we started the year with students kind of building as a small group, like curriculum Padlet. So they were telling us, what do you want to learn about and what do you want to do? Like what kind of projects do you want to do this year? every time we have a project phase of a unit, like I put out a task sheet and I'll review that with students, let them tear it up, give me their feedback so that it makes sense to them before I push it out, which is like their expectation of what to do. And then PIPs, I know I mentioned it, last month, like we're doing personal interest projects. And for some students, this is the best darn part of their day, where they've made a plan and we're giving them about an hour every week of built-in time to not only work on a project that's based entirely on something that they want to learn to do, but we're also helping them like scaffold a plan, put in action steps, and provide them supports to move forward with it. And it has been awesome to see get up off the ground this year.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Joe Rivers, do you have a comment about equity? Hold on, Joe, you're on mute.
Thanks, Don.
Yeah.
So our situation is similar to Sam's, in that I'm on a fully remote team, and we have 105 students and 5 adults who are working with them. And equity for us in our district, we're taking on the students from Brattleboro, the students from Dummerston, and the students from Putney. So we have 3 schools that are sending to our remote school. And the population, just by the nature of this structure, we have 2 tiers. We have the privileged and we have the marginalized. The privileged because they had the opportunity to choose remote, and the marginalized because when given the option of going someplace that is stressful and they don't have to go, they choose not to. And so just about all of our energy and time is put into trying to create an equitable platform for them to engage with us as we try to go forward with the content that we're dealing with. And so we've broken, we have 7th and 8th graders. And so in the mornings we see the 7th graders, in the afternoons we see the 8th graders, and we're synchronous with them for that half of the day. And then the other half of the day, they're asynchronous, working on different projects that we work together to create. All our energy really goes into the advisories that we have. And those are our kids. Those are the kids that we fight for. Those are the kids that we try to do the right thing for. And so it's about trying to make sure that they can access us and access the work and access each other in ways that are meaningful. And so it isn't a lot about content. It's mostly about just trying to build the relationships. We just finished getting halfway through our first quarter. And so we have, the assessments and we look at scores and one of the things that's interesting is that when we see how kids are doing academically, we find that the students might be struggling in some of the classes with some of us, but just about in every case, the advisees and the advisors have formed relationships in such a way that those kids are doing best with the teachers that are also their advisors. And that's because they've built that relationship at such a level where we've fought for them to be able to access technology. We fought for them to get a counselor to get involved. We fought for them to get the homeless organization in to deal with that situation. Because we've done those things and we've had those kind of contacts with the families, not just the students. The relationship is such that more happens. It's positive for them. And so I've learned a lot from, we use something I learned from Kevin last year in his presentations during this. We survey a lot by giving, every week we have students give us feedback on Fridays about how things are going every week. They write an email to us and they write an email to home to let us know, and it's the same email. that was something we picked up from you guys. The surveying that Don talks about, the feedback loop. Education's a reciprocal relationship, and it's really hard when we're doing this in a digital format. And so finding ways to make those connections. We do, Meg was talking about giving out information every week, and we do that through our website to parents to have those links as well. It's really hard. This is really hard. But equity for me is that idea that everybody gets a chance. And we're trying really hard to make that happen in a setting that is dialed up against it, privileged, struggling, marginalized. How do we make everybody feel like they do have a seat at the table? That's something we do every day, but we do it by our actions. And so that's the struggle right now for us.
I appreciate that. One of the things that, as like many of you, I'm taking notes here. And one of the things Meg said, putting marginalized groups in front of our kids all the time. And I'm wondering about, who's marginalized in our own classrooms, and how do you, and Sarah talked about, I think, who's voiceless in our classrooms and how do we give them voice? And we probably have marginalized groups right in front of us. And how, as Joe mentioned, do we create, equity? And that's something that I'm thinking about. And, listening to you, this just is so positive for me to listen to what other people are doing, because I know that I got the email idea from Lindsey, and now to hear more people doing that and what kind of a reflective tool that is and how important that can be in terms of communication, that's just a lot of what people are talking about is just really great teaching. And the other thing that I'm thinking a lot about too is in terms of equity is sort of mindset and the praise that we're giving to all of our students. Because I'm finding myself trying to be super intentional and cognizant of everything that we're doing well. So when we made it through a month, I was up in front of those kids cheerleading. You guys are doing awesome. This is great. And let's keep it up. And just being really intentional for all of our kids, showing them that they all matter and that, we're that team and we're moving forward. The other thing too, though, that I want to bring up, and I put this in the agenda, there's been some really good articles coming from, of all places, the New England Medical Journal, which has been talking about the impact of missing school on children, and especially children who are from those marginalized groups. And I put an article in there, and it talks about the impacts that the remote learning is having on some of these kids and the long-term impacts. And there's also an article in the New Yorker from 2 weeks ago by a guy named Alec McGillis, who started looking at natural disaster, like Hurricane Katrina, and they've taken data on the kids who were in second grade during the Hurricane Katrina, and how long it took those kids to get re-enrolled in school or to even reach, the grade level, and the results are devastating. And when you start to look at the length of time we've been in this pandemic, it's starting to become, for a second grader, it's 25% of their entire educational career has been at home. And so, how are we going to support kids in this, and how are we going to address it as systems is something that's deeply concerning to me. And especially like today, looking at the quote unquote, the third wave, how is this year going to go? And so what are we doing right now that in preparation for when it starts to get maybe more difficult? And so thinking about equity and what we're doing for all of our students, I think is just needs to be right there at the front of what we're doing every day. But I also know that, as Joe mentioned, creating those relationships, like I'm so glad I was face-to-face with my kids for a month. I feel like we could go remote and I could tap into kids because I have relationships with them. And every day from now on, I'm like, okay, how am I tagging this kid? How am I getting to know him so that when I have to talk to him online, I can be like, hey, what's, and building those relationships, especially with their families as well. Now, in recognition of, we're at 4:15. And so I kind of want to draw the conversation to a close. I know that speaking of advisory and relationships, I know that there's an opportunity out there that Lindsey wants to discuss. And then if we could just, I'm going to give people a little bit of think time. If there's one takeaway that you have from this conversation, like one word or phrase, if you could kind of present that in a round robin, just going around the rotation, that would be excellent. But I want to make sure that Lindsey, you get a chance to talk about that conference or webinar series, I believe, about advisory. And so I'll start with you, and then we'll just have a real quick, one word or phrase that you can take away from today's conversation. Lindsey?
Yeah, I mean, mine will kind of be combined because I think building off of what you said, Joe, it's advisory mindset, so like, what is it about the relationship between a young person and their advisor that allows for that trust, that advocacy, open communication, the willingness to take risks, like how can that be transferred into all of our classes or whatever that is, so I think, for me, it's about mindset and I really, and Sarah could probably do this more justice because she's going to be facilitating this series, but Sarah, do you want to talk about it real quickly? Like the advisory and the collective power of community?
Yeah, everything you just said. I know we're out of time, but yes, it'll be a 4-part webinar series. We're just realizing, we've always realized it, but we're just seeing so strongly, Don, what you just said, the relationships, and that was going to be my word. So I'll piggyback. Relationships was going to be my word. And I think now more than ever, really being able to have those solid, trusting relationships where you really know each student and you can be their advocate is critical. And having a really strong, thoughtful, meaningful advisory is the best place to start. And so the webinar series will be 4 weeks. I'm really just sort of diving into building a strong advisory for not only your students, but to help support your community.
All right. Thank
I
you.
was just gonna, and I would just add that, like within that piece, like it's, primarily like at the heart of it is around how to really center our youth and move into partnership in our advisory. And there's, we've had developed at Up for Learning, we developed a resource guide to support folks in the field because people don't have time to be thinking about like, what is the thing that I want to do tomorrow? It's like, so we're trying to make sure that we are responsive and supporting those in the field that perhaps would like some resources as well. So they could just kind of be part of the webinar series and have something to take with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, just wanted to add that piece.
Awesome. All right, folks, before we go through this, I just want to thank everybody again. Professional, dedicated, committed, and just really inspiring. So thank you very much. I'm actually just going to start out electronic equity. I think that's something I'm thinking about now. And thanks, Sarah, for talking about that. And then Maura?
My word was going to be relationships as well. And also Sarah posed a question, which was, why does it feel like someone doesn't have a voice? And I think that's a question that sometimes we assume someone has a voice, but don't always pause to ask that question as well. So thank you for that.
Kevin?
Connections and student voice, my two.
Meg?
Mine is just remember to check my assumptions.
Awesome. Sarah?
Relationships.
Sam?
Mine's also a shout out to Sarah. And it's a math problem, which is weird because I teach humanities. It's curriculum plus choice plus creativity equals understanding students.
Sam, awesome. Joe? Say again. Patience. Thank you. And Lindsey, did you want to finish us off?
I'm going to go back to my new term, thanks to Joe here, advisor mindset.
All right. thank you so much, everybody. I think our next webinar, I believe, is November 12th. The world will be different then, seeing as how we have a presidential election coming up. But I hope that everybody continues to fight the good fight, and I hope that you stay safe, healthy, and well. And thanks again for all you're doing for our students. And I'd also like to thank everybody for what you're doing for your colleagues too, because it's really important. And I think it makes a big difference when you can count on your colleagues to help out. So thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week and Friday, and we'll see you in November. Thanks, people. Have a great day.